Cameron, it's been on my mind for a while. If you could play any role, you're an actor, your dream role in a movie, what would it be? Reboots count, by the way.
It's a great question. So I do have some favorite franchises, but I think I'm going to differ a little bit from what my usual answer would be. Because this role is pretty fun, I think I would choose James Bond.
James Bond.
007.
Okay,
Yeah.
you want to be a special agent?
I don't fit the British guy aspect of it. I'm also not intimidating at all. So it'd be fun to see how they can make me look more
Well,
James Bondy.
you'd have a dialect coach. You'd be good. I think you could make it work.
Okay. What about you?
You know, I've given this a lot of thought. I think that there has been a slow, meteoric rise of scrawny white boys entering Hollywood and popping off. Tom Holland did it, so I want to follow in his footsteps. I want to be Spider-Man.
That fits.
I would love to be the next Spider-Man.
That fits. Would you keep the blonde, or would you go with the...
I think I would,
Back with the
because
brunette.
you have because if this is a reboot, you have Tom Holland, who is very much like the clean cut, brown hair, blue eyes, and then you have, I don't know if he has blue eyes, and then you have Miles Morales, who my favorite Spider-Man, by the way, and then I feel like you could use maybe more of like an all indie Spider-Man, like kind of like a little more out there. So
And that would be
yeah, I
you.
would stay, yeah.
All right.
There you go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Root Report. This is episode 3, and it's been a while. It's been busy with athletics here at New College for the last month or two, but it's going to be an exciting episode because we're talking about fall sports, which just wrapped up this last week.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting because you look at this fall sports we've had, soccer, both men and women's, and then volleyball. All three of those sports really did end on a bit of a high note. We were able to walk out of the season with something to smile about, and that's really all we were looking for in the first year of the Sun Conference, was just to see, as much as we knew there were going to be lows, also experience those highs.
Yeah, and I think it's good to start with men's and women's soccer.
Let's do
it. For those of you who followed NCF athletics in our first season, massive improvements in year 2
Absolutely.
For both teams. Record-wise, there was obviously some setbacks. I think, especially for men's and women's soccer, this is one of the toughest conferences in the country. We talked about that in the preseason, just how tough their road was going to be. But women's soccer, 4-7-1, good record. They won their first conference game this season. They competed with some of the best teams in the country. Looking at their schedule, a 1-2 loss to number 14 SCAD, who was the Sun Conference champions yet again for women's soccer. They scored 2 goals versus the number 2 team in the country at Kaiser earlier in the season. A ton of competitive games. They had some big wins too. 7-1 win over Florida College. That was one of their biggest wins of the season. They had a 6-0 win over Florida College, so completely dominated the Falcons in the games that they played against them this season. And then again, these Sun Conference games, 1-2 to Southeastern. 2-1 win over Weber International. Then you had a 0-1 loss to Receiving Vote St. Thomas. While the record maybe wasn't what you wanted, there was still so much growth this season that I think it's definitely something to highlight.
Well, I think growth is a significant word, and another word I would bring up is we got to see the potential of this team. The record overall, 4-7-1, obviously, like you said, probably not the record you want, but what we did get to see is the ceiling of this team. Looking back, I think the ceiling was much higher than we probably initially thought it was for this roster. And I would even contend that this record should have been better than what it was. Unfortunately, due to things out of our control, it just wasn't the case. A big thing I'm talking about is just the postponed and rescheduled games. I mean, you go to the start of the season, 1, 2, 3, first 3 games were postponed or canceled. So already heading into their first game, that was on September 14th. So all these teams already had 3 or 4 games under their belt and had more experience right out of the gate, were getting hot, and of course they lost that match to Kaiser, their first of the year. A few weeks later, they're starting to get into a rhythm. Another game is postponed. A few weeks later, we have a hurricane come. They missed 2 games. And I just think it's so critical when you're a young team to get in that rhythm, to get in that regular season feel, to kind of start to feel yourself a little bit. And this team could never really do that. There are so many gaps in that schedule. They just kept getting thrown off balance. So I would say I would have liked to see what this record looks like after they play a full season, because I think it could be a lot better than what it was.
Yeah, women's soccer had a fantastic year. There were a couple players too that had some great years.
Yeah.
For that team, I know Sofia Hernandez Cruz led them in goals. We talked about Consuelo Di Maria on the broadcast a lot. The freshman was really good all year. And Maria Schatzel in goal had to deal with a ton of shots this year. Made a ton of saves. Did have some mistakes, but at the end of the year, you're a goalie. You're getting shot at as much as she did. I think she performed really well as well.
I agree, and obviously it's probably a little bit too early to start talking about turnover and what this team looks like going into next year, but from what I've been hearing, things are pretty positive both from the roster and coaching staff perspective. And that's, you mentioned players. This is also a young coaching staff, and it's a group that I think has really formed a tight bond with these players, and that's going to go a long way heading into the next few years. This is a young team.
Yeah. And men's soccer also finished their season. Record for them was 3-9-3. Biggest room for improvement for them is just goal scoring. A ton of draws, and those are draws against really good teams. So we saw them draw Blue Mountain University in Mississippi. That was their second game of the year after a 4-0 win to Florida College. So we saw a ton of highs in that 4-0 win, and then we saw them down to a draw against Blue Mountain in the second game, and then we saw a 1-2 loss to Faulkner, a 1-1 tie with Weber, and then we saw them go versus the number 17 team in the country. You lose by 1. That right there, while your record's not great, that's a great start.
I mean, absolutely. I'm scrolling through the schedule right now, and, even in the research I've done, pretty much every one of these games, minus a few, you're looking at 0-1 losses, 1-1 draws. This is just a team that has played such strong defense throughout the whole season, but the offense hasn't been there. The offensive production is something that we need to see a little bit more out of, especially because when you pair that with defense, if you can just, in so many of these games, if you just put up one extra goal, you're looking at a win or a tie, at least. And that's a big swing on the overall record, which was 3-9-3, not exactly what you're looking for, similar to women's soccer. But I think both of these teams, when you take a step back, even though things aren't quite where they're at, you can identify the strong points and you can identify the weaknesses. And just being aware of those things make huge differences when you go into future seasons.
Yeah, and I think another key thing to note there is their home record. So they were able to go 3-3-2 at home, which
That's
is a good home record, especially for year one in a really tough conference. Just like we mentioned with women's soccer, this men's soccer conference is one of the best in the country. They had the top-ranked team in the country. They had 3 teams ranked all year long, with a 4th team being a tough team in either Southeastern or SCAD, who are 2 of the toughest teams in terms of soccer in the country. So for them to pull out 3 wins at home, big year for them. And I think head coach Glody Conga knows what he needs moving forward, which I think is going to fare well for their development leading into 2025.
Right, and like Coach Conga talked about, you go back to the final game of the season, we got a chance to chat with him in the post game. This was definitely a year where it was kind of sorting out the kinks and the bumps and working through things. It was a bumpy start to the season. There was the Florida College win, which was a great way to start, but not a lot of highs after that. So this team definitely battled some adversity, but were able to work through it. And even that last game of the season, obviously it was a tie, but we were able to see them kind of shift their offensive perspective a little bit and grow based on the last few games.
Yeah, and then our final fall sport was women's volleyball, who honestly a surprise to the conference there, semifinal run.
Absolutely.
So they finished the year 9-13 in outside of conference. That's their full record, but 7-7 in the conference in the first year is a real achievement.
It really is. It really is, Cameron. This was kind of the one sport where, in our eyes, we had a good view of what soccer was going to look like, and we knew that volleyball, they had some playmakers, but it was just kind of an unknown. How is this team going to do? They definitely answered a lot of questions this year.
Yeah, and they had some really talented players. Obviously, 3 people named on the first team all-conference. It's Cassidy Casey, Louisa Hoffman, and then Rafaela Domingos. And that was a talented roster all the way down.
Yeah, and even you look at some of those stat leaders, you have players even that, weren't named on that conference sheet who still performed very well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty interesting. 2 players, Cassidy Casey and Kai Suba, they were battling for that top kill spot nearly all season long. We get to the end of the season, they're both tied for it at 184. So, you can't really say enough good things about this team. I think another one where they really hit a stride about midway through season. They've probably found their peak a little bit sooner than some of the other teams, which is why they were able to make that postseason push. You just go back to those last like 3 or 4 games, and it was just such a great atmosphere, especially at home. A huge five set win against Weber. We were both there for that. A 3-0 game on the road against Kaiser. Obviously, getting a playoff win at home. Another thing, though, I want to point out, Cameron, is the fan turnout we've seen from volleyball, because another one of the unknowns. This is still a school that's a little bit new to athletics, a little bit new to the culture, and this is a school where we don't have a home game on campus. So it means the two of those things: are we really going to have fans showing up to games? And obviously, we had our good days and our bad days, but towards the end, it was almost every home game. We were having a lot of noise, a lot of energy, a lot of passion. So shout out to the team, but this team plays best when they're drawing energy from that home crowd.
Yeah, and the home crowd was great. I mean,
Yeah.
the athletes turnout, the non-athlete turnout, parents. It really did create, like you said, a very electric atmosphere, especially in the postseason, which I think was a big reason they were able to knock off Weber in that first round game at home.
Yeah, and what I will say, because we've said a lot of good about women's volleyball, I think you look ahead, and the pros we talked about for New College men's soccer and women's soccer, some of those pros are unfortunately cons for volleyball. You have a lot of players. You look at the soccer team. Oh, they're a very young team. They're going to have a lot of years together. Not necessarily the case with volleyball. We mentioned some of those players, and a lot of them. We had 3 seniors. We had Casey. We had Hoffman, and already just naming those 2, that's our defensive leader and our offensive leader. So there is going to be a little bit of turnover, but looks like there is still a roster building here that can be, powerful in years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. With the end of fall sports, now we transition into winter sports. So men's and women's basketball starting off their seasons fairly well. Sun Conference play starts tonight, so they are at Ave Maria, which is a ranked game for the men's and a very tough game for the women's as well. You've had an opportunity to watch both teams very closely so far.
Right.
What have you noticed so far?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you, Cameron. I know it's not. It still kind of feels like the preseason. It's just still giving preseason vibes to me. Just every game, we're seeing a lot of points being put up, but we're seeing a lot of sloppy play. And we're seeing these teams not quite live up to their potential, but still blowing out opponents. And it just doesn't feel like it should be this easy. And I'm not trying to discredit basketball, either one of those teams. Great coaching staff, great rosters both those teams have. And I do believe the sky's the limit. But with that being said, you are seeing, especially on the side of the women's team, what we saw from them last home game. You're seeing a lot of turnovers. You're seeing a lot of missed layups, a lot of points that should be gimmies for that team. So I think a lot to clean up, but both of those teams have, what is it now, 5-1 record.
Yeah,
6-1 because we had the doubleheader.
Yeah.
So, it almost feels like I'm looking for things to complain about, but it'll be interesting to see how these teams fare entering conference play.
Yeah, and then like we mentioned for fall sports, the Sun Conference is one of the most talented leagues in the country at this level. We saw it in the fall. We see it in the winter. We have ranked sides on both the men's and women's basketball rosters and schedules. So it's going to be really entertaining, I think, to see these teams go and try and compete with some of the best in the country. And, you're getting 2 really big tests early.
Right. And while I was, more negative opening up with this conversation, I also think it's important to note how significant their start is going to be for this and I'm talking in terms of both of these teams, mind you, for this team's confidence, right? You start the season 6-1. Even if, you didn't play the strongest competition, even if you made mistakes along the way, you're 6-1. So that going in, you're going to be a team that is going to give you a rough time. Even go back to the losses, New College having the opportunity to play on the road against, a really cool D1 program. And you lost that game, of course, but still putting up a good performance. So I think heading into the Sun Conference play, obviously a challenge, like you said, just hit the mic there. But, both these teams walking in with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and those 2 teams get their start tonight. That's at 7:30 versus Ave Maria. And then our another home doubleheader, our first Sun Conference home doubleheader for men's and women's basketball on Saturday. That's November 23rd. That game's at 4 p.m. Eastern. I think we're both really excited for winter sports. We know spring sports just around the corner. It feels
Yeah.
like the years move so fast already. So we're gonna try and get you more episodes of the Root Report. It was pretty hard in the fall. We are honest about that with schedules and games and multiple sports going
Right.
on. So I think we'll have more of an opportunity here. We want to get more coaches on. We want to get more players on. Start to grow this
Absolutely.
thing a little bit. So yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Short and sweet, how we like it. Want to get to the point and then get you guys on with the rest of your days. We appreciate you guys listening. Be sure to head to GoMightyBanians.com. New and improved, by the way, GoMightyBanians.com. You can find all of your favorite team schedules, all of your favorite teams rosters, and all the information on the Banians on there.
Can I say the line?
Yeah.
Can I say the line? Okay.
Yeah.
This podcast is like a Sabrina Carpenter album because it's short and sweet.
There you go.
That's the name of a Sabrina Carpenter album. Short and sweet.
I didn't know that,
Okay,
but
yeah.
have a good day, folks.